All right, so this should be fun. Let's talk about Halo Infinite because it looks like a former 343 employee has shared some of their thoughts and insight into the development of Halo Infinite online. And I wanted to go over that here today because while I first saw it, I said, okay, maybe that's correct, hard to say. But Jason Schreier, who appears to be doing his own story on 343 in the development of Halo Infinite, more or less said, yeah, I've been kind of hearing the same thing. So I figure we would go over that here today. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. If you're new here to the Spawn Wave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So we know Halo Infinite, of course, was supposed to come out next to the Series X. It was delayed, and we assume it's coming out later this year, fall or holiday. So it very well could end up being a full 1-year delay. But since the start of this year, we have been getting updates around this game from 343 way of screenshots and different write-ups talking about what they're working to improve and kind of build on as we head towards its next big grand re-reveal, we assume is next month at E3 from Microsoft. But let's head over here and take a look at what this former 343 Skybox artist had to say. They originally shared this in a video speaking in Mandarin. So a person at ResetEra, that being under the name Random 0 Point, transcribed it into English so we could kind of see what exactly was going on here. Starting at the top, saying his overall feeling on Halo Infinite. In fact, I think the finished product will still be great. The story is a big improvement. The gameplay is much richer. Though the development cycle is too long, don't expect it to be an epic-making masterpiece. And yeah, the development's been going on for quite a while. Halo 5 came out in 2015, but it sounds like they've been working on this engine like well before that. So this has been a long project. And there was also word that the development budget for this game, alongside the engine, of course, they're developing at the same time, Slipstream, upwards of $500 million. So there's not only a lot of pressure and expectations being put on this from Microsoft themselves because of the investment, but from gamers. I mean, think about the fact that they delayed this a year after we saw that disastrous demo that they showed that did not go over well online at all. And it's the storied Halo franchise that is Microsoft's flagship. We're expecting a lot out of Halo Infinite, and unfortunately, I don't know if Halo Infinite will be able to live up to that at all. Like, a lot of people are expecting this to come out and just be an easy, solid 95 on Metacritic, and I have to question if it'll even touch 90, to be honest. And a lot has to do with just the overall expectations around AAA, and now we're talking about quadruple A games, and it's tough when it comes to creating these games and getting it out there with high praise nowadays, just because of really the releases we've had over the last 10 to 15 years, continuing to build up those expectations as we've gone along here. They say the company executives were overly ambitious, where we heard that one before, Cyberpunk 2077. They wanted to make Halo Infinite a semi-open world game, so the engine needed to be changed significantly. They had to make the game and develop the engine at the same time. Due to engine defects, many workflows were not ideal, though they are now much more improved than before. So the engine, the Slipstream engine, was created because they had been using the same Halo engine forever. Like, basically since Halo started, they had been using pretty much the same engine, and they decided, hey, if we want to take this Halo franchise, as we assume they would, the next 10 or 20 years, we're not going to use that same engine. We should take the opportunity now to build a brand new one that we can then use without having to go out to Epic and use the Unreal Engine, for example, and we don't have to pay them royalties on all of these Halo games we may want to do in the future. They could do different branching paths for Halo. They could have the classic Halo game, and then they could have also spin-offs of it still using this engine. So rather than pay royalties to Unreal every time they want to make a new Halo game, they make this engine, they modify it as they go along, and they don't have to worry about that. But with that comes the massive upfront costs of creating an engine. I mean, we're talking about $500 million is the rumored budget for this, and I have to say most of that's probably going towards the engine itself. But as they say here, due to engine defects, many workflows were not ideal. If the engine is new, they have to continue to mold it and adapt it to a project that's probably constantly changing, according to company executives who are overly ambitious, possibly adding and stacking more and more things to the to-do list that maybe that engine is not immediately designed to cope with. All of a sudden, the engine's changing while the game is also changing, and maybe one breaks the other. All of a sudden, a workflow that may have been set up to look pretty straightforward is all over the place, thrown into flux. So it sounds like just trying to get on the same page for the engine in the game was already a struggle. They say that they are much more improved now than before, and that could just be that the engine has gotten to a point where it's able to accept a lot of the requests that are being made on the game side. They say last year's disastrous demo was because many engine features were not fully implemented at that time. And that's actually something, if I remember correctly, was mentioned in the initial write-up as to what happened, because 343 did talk about this, like what went on with the demo, and they had mentioned that some animations weren't ready, especially with like the faces, and that's where Craig came from, is because they didn't have animations set up for the faces of the different enemies, and the AI was a little off at the time, and just the overall environments weren't ready. Basically, not a lot of the game was ready, but they still put a demo together because they were trying to push this thing out by the Series X launch, and it just didn't work out. Obviously, we're not playing Halo Infinite now. They say for a variety of reasons, the game content compared to the original idea has been cut. Same for multiplayer. This has led to some things I've made over the years that no one will probably ever see. Cut content happens all the time. That's why we look into those beta builds for games that sometimes leak out, because a lot of times different pieces of content, whether it's enemies or environments, are left on the cutting room floor because there's just no time to get them done. So I would expect if they did create skyboxes, for example, for different levels that are not going to be in the initial release, could be in DLC, could be in a multiplayer map that comes out down the road, or maybe a new single player campaign that gets added in. It's possible. Otherwise, yeah, they just decided not to use it, and that's kind of the way it is in game development, so that part doesn't really surprise me much at all. And that leads us to the part that Jason Schreier is probably pursuing in his upcoming story that he's alluded to, where it says the team at 343, especially the low-level employees, works very hard, and many of them have experienced working overtime until the early hours of the morning in the past few years. Crunch confirmed. So at this point, because we keep hearing these stories, if I see a big AAA game, I pretty much assume that at some point in development, there was crunch, and at some point. I mean, a lot of these games take 4 to 5 years to make, and it takes a ton of developers. Yeah, at one point in time, some of them probably worked late into the night and then early into the morning. It's just how widespread is it across the different companies? Like what we heard with Naughty Dog sounded pretty bad at times. So that's just kind of where we are with, again, the big AAA games. A lot of expectations, limited number of developers, limited number of hours in the day. You're going to get a lot of them working overtime to try to get these massive grand projects done in time. And in some cases, they get delayed and they still have to crunch to get it done. So whenever Jason puts out his story, I assume it's going to be exploring things like crunch at 343 and, of course, the overall development issues that are clearly happening with Halo Infinite right now. Now he works at Certain Affinity, still doing some Halo Infinite outsourcing work, and he feels good to be out of 343's baggage. So looking at this, the biggest thing that sticks out to me is they're trying to develop this engine alongside the game, and you have overly ambitious executives who are mostly trying to shape the game as it would be good for marketing and trying to push it out as this next big AAA experience that doesn't necessarily match up very well with what's actually being created. As things change and they go through and they keep adding more to the pile, you end up with something like Cyberpunk. And you know what? If Halo Infinite had come out when it was supposed to next to the Series X, I firmly believe it would have been like Cyberpunk, where it would have come out broken. Like, even if they had pushed patch after patch after patch, it still would have struggled, I feel like. I mean, a year delay? Does that mean that if it had come out, it may not have been ready until, like how Cyberpunk is now, where that's probably not going to be ready until the end of the year? So it was probably a good idea to delay it, obviously, based on what we saw with that demo last year. But wow, it's amazing to me that Halo, of all franchises, I mean, it's the big flagship franchise for Microsoft, is going through this. But they created the new engine. If they had used the older one and they didn't try to make this big, grand, ambitious project for Halo and make it semi-open world, it probably would have been another Halo game. It would have come out. I feel like it would have gotten average to above average reviews like we saw with Halo 5. Everyone said, this is cool. And then we kind of would have moved on from there. It just seems like they got caught up in even the expectations that have been created from the AAA gaming landscape, where Halo can't just be good. It can't just be great. It has to be a masterpiece. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's going to be able to do that, especially with the expectations that are being placed out there now. But hundreds of people are going to try. And I guess we'll see next month if they've been able to make significant improvements to the game, and I guess we'll see if it can still make it out in time for the 2021 holiday season. But let me know what you guys think about these comments down below with Halo Infinite. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.